as we parent and shepherd and tend and nurture and lead our children, there is a molding that we want to happen. We want to mold them, have them marked by the gospel and the knowledge of God and the experience in the life of God that he gives to them. We want them to be molded. It's not brainwashing, browbeating, breaking them down to build them up. That's the military that does that. We want God to transform them, and the only way that that's going to happen is as the Spirit gives them life that comes from Jesus, the author of life.
All right, man. Good to see you, Robert. It's been a little bit. How you doing?
I am doing pretty well. I'm thinking, so there's no guarantee, but I'm thinking that I'm under 2 months now.
Man, that's awesome.
Under
Getting
2 months.
close,
It's possible.
brother.
It's not guaranteed, but I think under 2 months.
Is anything ever guaranteed with
No.
Uncle Sam?
Oh,
Probably
word.
not, right?
Yeah. Well, taxes. But let's not get into that.
Taxes,
Let's not get into that.
Yeah. Let's stay positive.
Yes.
And be coming home soon.
Yeah, no.
We're excited about it. Before we get into our topic, man, tell me about your run today. You were texting me earlier.
This is unbelievable.
You ran a 5K, and tell our audience. Tell our audience the conditions.
Today was the worst day, weather-wise,
of your life,
of my life, and of this time away. So it was only 109, which for here is like actually like a relatively calm and mild.
It's a mild day. Yeah.
But the humidity was such that it was at one point, I think, 138. Someone said 140. I did not see that. So it was just gross. So I was actually starting to get on the angry side as the day was going along, because I had committed to run this 5K.
Imagine
and
that.
I was thinking, why? This is the stupidest thing. So I was getting angry, and I told the guy that roped me into it, I said, I don't like you. At any rate, a thunderstorm came through without any rain, because it doesn't rain here. It hasn't rained since I've been here, and it probably won't rain while I'm here. The thunderstorm came through and left, and then it was like, it got down to like 100 and something, and it was only maybe like 10 degrees more is what it felt like. So it was like 110, 111 or something like that. So it actually got really, for here, pretty nice.
Yeah, cooled off quite a bit.
I get back to my dorm room, I get changed and ready to go. I'm like, all right, it's going to be fine. Everything's good. And a sandstorm began. And sandstorms...
Yeah, it sounds really fun.
I have to say nice words. They're not nice. I don't enjoy them. It was swirling pretty badly. At any rate, ran this 5K with like 400 other people. And, the team that I'm here with, 11 of the 12 of us ran. And the other one was doing something as part of the event.
He had other plans that day?
He was actually supporting the event.
Sorry, guys. I wish I could, but something's on my calendar already.
So we all ran it. There were some times that I was not exactly running, but I did not stop. I kept going the whole time, and survived it. And I have a T-shirt.
Awesome.
I have a T-shirt to tell
water.
T-shirt to tell it. This
nice.
It was the hat and T-shirt day. No hat, but T-shirt.
Nice.
So it was good. It was great. It was good.
Nice.
Team building kind of thing. So it's all good. Glad it's done.
Awesome, man. We're glad you're still alive.
There were questions about whether I was going to survive it, but I did. I did in fact survive.
That's good. It's good. Hydration's very important.
I've been pounding water all day, and since then, still pounding water. Throughout this time, I'm going to be pounding water.
Keep it going, man. As long as you're there, keep those pallets of water coming in.
What I'll say again, as I've said previously, this has been a really great experience. Tons and tons of opportunity to connect with people, to support people, to point people to Jesus, to remind them that God is faithful and good and available, and that in Jesus He's for you. He's a safe place, a refuge. So yeah, it's really great. It's
That's
been
awesome, man.
it's been a good experience. I don't like not everything is enjoyable about it, but the Lord is working good.
Yeah.
So I couldn't ask for
Awesome,
anything
man.
more than that.
Awesome. Always good to get a good report, man. That's great. That's great. All right, without further ado, let's dive in here. We are going to talk today a little bit about some kind of loose ends from our last conversation about the Shiny Happy People documentary. We had a whole podcast a few weeks ago devoted to that, and we felt like there were some things we still wanted to cover that we didn't get a chance to get around to. And so here we are, and we're going to talk specifically about this idea of training our children, because I remember as you and I talked about the documentary, or we could call it an expose, as you and I talked about it, we felt like there was such an obvious bias and slant. It almost seemed to imply that this kind of idea that any kind of biblical Christian parenting, any kind of training or guidance is automatically evil, basically, or abusive, right? Like it's all controlling, it's all abusive, and obviously that's just the human tendency for the pendulum to swing too far in one direction or the other. And so you and I want to say a little bit about more of a balanced perspective, and as usual, give hopefully a gospel-centered perspective on this topic of parenting, and kind of just use the documentary as a springboard to be able to talk about that. So for starters, Rob, would you just speak to what you remember seeing that kind of struck you as being biased and maybe an unfair picture of parenting, or maybe just an extreme kind of picture that they painted there that was unhelpful in some ways?
Yeah, so I'm sure that some of the things that they were pointing to in the documentary, there's a grain of truth to a lot of it. But
Yeah.
what was really bothering me about the presentation, there was a lot that bothered me about the subject matter, obviously, but what was bothering me about the presentation was they were utilizing every possible angle to talk about the training that this group was trying to instill in the young people, and making it look like they were building up a war fighting crew, like they were going to perform some kind of a crusade. We're building an army, when the reality is they were just trying to instill disciplines and values that they held to be important, and that has taken on a negative light, even though if you look from the other angle at what the general populace is doing, they're training their children in a militant way.
Yeah, everybody's training their children
And
in
they do
some
it in a
way, right?
militant way. Like
Yep.
there's
Yep.
the Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts, and there's Eagle Scouts and Cub Scouts and all these kinds of things, and then they've got there's the military portion of it. You've got the Sea Cadets and the Young Marines, and you have the Civil Air Patrol, like all kinds of things. Junior ROTC programs that are going on, because people think, okay, we want to instill values, we want to instill disciplines, we want to help people to grow in some of the values of just being good, disciplined people. Why is it that just because this group comes under a banner of Christianity, that is looked upon automatically as they're raising up an army to fight against the world? Now, I get it, because there have been a lot of exposures from radicalized Christianish people that, the Westboro Baptist Church, is that correct?
Oh yeah,
Is that,
Westboro
I hope I'm
Baptist.
saying
I think that's
the
right.
correct name.
I think that's the right
their
name,
website is actually God Hates Fags. Like that's their actual website for their organization. Yeah. Like there's something wrong with that militant, whatever they're trying to accomplish. but don't just take the radicalized people and assume that every single thing that anyone might do that looks like discipline or training or instilling values automatically is aimed at fighting against the culture. One of the things that I've said over the years to the church that we have the privilege of shepherding is we don't want to let the world know what we're against. We want the world to know who we're for, including where we want to fight for them. We want to fight for them by showing them that God is great and a saving God and a merciful and gracious, loving, patient God. We want to tell the world who we're for. We're for God, and as a result of being for God, we're for people.
Right, right. So the nature of the fight's important to define too, right? It's not. I think of when Jesus told his disciples, "If my kingdom were of this world, then my disciples would fight." Right? I would have you armed and have you fight. This is not the same kind of fight as humans are accustomed to. It's a war of ideas. It's a war of truth claims, and we are communicating the truth to others, including our kids, for their benefit, not to control people, not to abuse people, but quite the contrary, because this is the truth that sets free. This is the truth that brings healing and help. And so yeah, I agree with you, man. The picture they painted, some of the B-roll footage, it was literally looked like military boot camp, right? And they were purposeful in selecting those images, probably from whatever their version of the Boy Scouts is or whatever, when in reality, as you said, hey, there's all different versions of that nobody has any problem with. But because this is a Christian thing, and because, as we know, it's open season on traditional values and anything remotely resembling traditional values or religion, it's open season, so they're gonna come hard at that. At the same time, I would say this too. Let me just one more thought on that. Even as you were talking about the different versions of that kind of structure and training for children, and you gave the example of like Boy Scouts and the military that has these programs for kids and things like that. But I was just thinking of, even if you take a home where there's no religious beliefs, so to speak, like they don't go to a church, they don't subscribe to any particular religion. Nevertheless, every household has its own culture, its own way of thinking, and you cannot help but influence. Everybody's influencing their kids in one way or another. Everybody's indoctrinating their kids. So it's a matter of, okay, what is the superior approach to doing that? And while you and I would say, yeah, there were some huge problems with what was going on in the Gothard movement and the Duggar family, those examples, and some of the things that you and I have been through in our own personal lives in the circle that we were in for a time, we would be quick to criticize and say, yeah, there's some things to critique there and to counterbalance and so on. But what we're concerned about is like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, as if anything related to biblical rearing or nurturing or guiding is somehow, by virtue of that fact, abusive. And that's not the case at all. That would be a tragic pendulum swing way too far the other direction. So there you go. You're up.
Yeah. So I think to be clear, as you just were, like, we wouldn't espouse to the things that they would instill as vitally important. And I also think there's a difference between brainwashing people, as it might feel from the way that we understand it, brainwashing them, as opposed to influencing and leading and trying to present who God is and what God brings and what God offers and how God is toward us and for us. We would definitely go about those things differently in a stark way, but that doesn't mean that we couldn't do. We don't, but it doesn't mean we couldn't do some of those same discipline oriented things, as far as, like, showing people how to march, or teaching people how to do physical training. Like those are all good things. You do it with basketball, you do it with football, like people do it all the time.
Drills
so,
of
like,
all
you can
kinds,
instill
right?
that.
Yeah.
Exactly. But when it comes to what we're instilling, it's leading people and nurturing people and teaching people and presenting, as opposed to brainwashing, manipulation, and domination.
Yes.
So
absolutely. And I think we would say well, I don't just think. I know we would say, uh, once again, it really boils down to how you understand God, what you think of his character, how you believe he is treating you, guiding you, teaching you. That's going to dictate how you then go about guiding your children. From obviously,
Yep.
for a believer of any kind, for someone who would say, "Hey, I'm trying to follow the biblical model of parenting." For that type of person, the most important factor is going to be, who do you understand God to be? How do you understand God operating? If you view him as a tyrant, as a dictator, if you view him as like a Pharaoh like person who's just cracking the whip and trying to control and just trying to get his way from people and demanding from people, then it makes sense that you're going to treat people accordingly, including the people in your own household. On the other hand, if you flip that around and you see God for who he is, how we understand him in terms of his heart, his desire to call sin what it is, to provide redemption and forgiveness and mercy, and then to provide guidance for living in the world that he created. He knows the world he created. He knows the laws that he wired into this natural world, the natural order of things, scientific laws, and all the different things that he gives us to equip us to navigate through life, and then we can pass on to our kids. That's really valuable. But the key factor is, again, like, who do we understand God to be? How do we understand his character and his treatment of us? And which makes sense of even when Jesus gave the overarching command of love as I have loved you. And then you see Paul in the New Testament and elsewhere, this kind of summary, hey, that summarizes all of it, is just this idea of love for others in light of how we've been loved by God. So that really sets the tone for the whole thing. And I think we would agree that's probably what was either distorted or missing or somehow minimized in circles where there's flagrant abuse taking place.
Yeah. So in addition to those pieces, let me just kind of add this. I'm not sure. I don't think we covered this in what was just said. Like, as we understand God and all he is and all he offers and how he designed things, we also know this and try to proclaim this truth because it's really helpful, that God knows that we are in our own nature bound in our sin. Like, he knows that we're blinded. He knows that we're dead in our trespasses and sins. His expectation of a person who's dead in their trespasses and sins is not that we're going to do righteousness. His expectation is that we cannot, which is why he calls us to him for mercy and forgiveness and grace and life and fruit. So that knowledge of God that he reveals about his omniscience, his all-knowing nature, it means he knows our nature, and he knows that no one is going to come to him unless he first enters the equation. And that's exactly what he's doing through the heralding of truth. The gospel is calling people to himself, helping people to see him for who he really is, and allowing them to see themselves as how God sees them. Like, it's radically different than clean up the outside of the cup through discipline.
Right.
It's look at this God who knows our frames. He remembers that we are dust, that we're mastered by our sin, and he comes to us taking on human flesh. He comes to us and masters all these things that we have been mastered by. And then he says, I'm giving you my son. And Jesus willingly lays his life down to bear the sin and reproach and guilt that I was mastered by and came flooding out of my life. Like, that knowledge of God knowing me and his willingness to reach out to me the same way he reaches out to my children, the same way he reaches out to the nations, is an amazing reality. I think it really helps a person when they can understand that God, while we were yet sinners, demonstrates his love toward us by sending his son.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Like what you said, and that's that idea of again, that's the gospel-centered approach where we're saying, hey, look, we are dependent upon God to do the work in the heart of our children, in our own hearts, that only He can do, and turning the lights on and helping us see the way things are, helping us see who He is and what He's provided, and so we do, and we're called to, herald the gospel, to over and over again speak the gospel to our kids, which we have said many times at our church is not good advice. It's good news. It's a declaration of what's been done for you. It's not a list of demands or things that you need to do. So, but all that begs the question, as I was listening to you talk about it, and even as I summarize it again here, it begs the question for people. And our purpose today is not to go into all the different details of parenting and training. There's so many things. There's so many different categories and topics to address there. That's not our point to cover all that, but just to keep it at a kind of a high level, but just to say, look, it begs the question, okay, well, that's good. You're telling your kids who God is. You're helping them see His mercy and His grace, His offer for them in Christ, and it takes care of those vertical realities. But how does that help me when, my kids are fighting with each other all day, or when I got a kid who refuses to get up and go to school, or a kid who refuses to get a job, or, these real life experiences we have? Okay, great, good that they know who God is, but I got on the ground stuff going on right in front of me right here, right now. I mean, the Bible does give guidance for those areas too. It's just all about context, right? And the difference between like the vertical and the horizontal. So I have a lot of thoughts on that, but anything you would say to that? Um,
That
you're probably not
you just
surprised.
opened up a whole
Yeah,
can of worms right there, brother.
yeah. We got like 5 minutes
Yeah.
left, so that'll be good. Okay.
Oh, we have more than 5 minutes. We're going to be
Okay.
expounding for
Yeah.
hours
Buckle
here.
up, everybody. We're
No,
going to be here a while.
yeah. No, I think that's great. Yes, the most important reality that we are going to care about for our children is their eternal soul, right? And the way that I understand it, and the way that it's to me, it's the hardest part of life is that concern for the spiritual well-being of our children. Like that to me is so hard because you can't make it happen.
Yeah.
Um,
No.
and we're back,
And we're back.
broken up again. But one of the great realities is if we can trust God for our own soul, if God is trustworthy to shepherd my soul and bring me to glory, then if I can trust Him with that, I can trust Him with anything, including the souls of my children. And so when we can entrust the souls of our children to God, we can, with freedom, declare the good news to them and pray that they will embrace Jesus for themselves. And then, if the Lord redeems them, and we expect Him to do that, if He does that, then He's going to be at work in those details of them getting a job and being a respectable husband or wife, like just being able to function with other people. But the gospel doesn't guarantee that they're going to not be lazy or respectful human beings. So, as moms and dads, we do want to train our children with virtuous things. Here's my father used to say, like, my father's like a broken record, and I mean that in a very positive way. I don't mean that negatively. Some of the things my dad taught me growing up: be at the gatepost waiting. It was his expression. He would use that catchphrase all the time. It meant, oh, when it's time to go to work, don't show up at the last second. Be there before the time and be ready for the day. Do your job really well, and be prepared for it. So like he would say that constantly, and he just threw that same catchphrase out there all the time. Be at the gatepost waiting, and I knew exactly what it meant. Like that's not spiritual exactly, it has spiritual implications, it's practical.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to teach our sons to be respectful of human beings, everyone, those that are in their, that are authority to them, those that are their peers, and those who might come underneath their authority. We want to teach them those values. We want to teach them morals. We want to teach them about the proper use of purposes of sex and money and all those things. So there are lots of practical
Yep.
things we want to train our children in,
Yep.
just so you instill values. But ultimately, you could have the most value-driven child, the most respectful child. If they don't know Jesus, at the end of the day,
Yeah. What's the ultimate
goodness
benefit?
gracious,
Yeah.
yeah,
Right. Yeah. Right.
it'll do them well in time and space, but it's not going to do them well in
Right.
eternity.
Right.
So my goal, my heart's desire for my children, for the people of the church that I'm privileged to shepherd with you, for the people that I'm having the opportunity to shepherd here, it's like, Lord, open their eyes, help them see everything could go to absolute crap, literally around them, and that doesn't make any difference compared to what you have offered them in Jesus and what you have offered them in yourself. And if they can grab onto that, like, that's going to endure past all the days of this life. You might have 85, 90 years of like financial well-being and great moral living. If you don't know Jesus, it's going to end really poorly. So, Lord, you can do it. Let them see. So we do both. We hold out the gospel for them, and we instill values that we think are important. At the same time, and I don't know if this is the part to get in this, and you can tell me, hey, hold off on this. I have never intended, nor never do intend, to browbeat my children into a decision for Jesus.
Yeah.
Never. I talk to them about Jesus.
Yep.
I tell them about him. I ask them questions, but I'm not going to beg my child to accept Jesus. What I'm going to do is going to keep pointing to him and tell them what God is looking for from them is to trust him, to believe him, to see him, to experience him, to embrace him, to receive from God all that he has to offer them. But I'm not going to browbeat my children into a decision.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you, and I think with my kids, one of my heart's desires for them that fits with that is I want them to understand their need for a savior. Like, I want them to not just hear, okay, there's this sort of formula or prayer I can pray, or I can walk an aisle or sign a card that says I believe in Jesus and I know he died for me, but they really have self-awareness, that they see the depth of their problem. They see their need for salvation, and that at some point, and like we said, that this, like, only God can help any of us come to this place when we come to the end of ourselves and say, that's not just words, that's like living water for my soul. I need Christ. I need my creator God. I can't navigate through life without him. I can maybe accomplish some things, like you said. I could be a very successful person, very productive person, but man, without him, without my God, what do I have for meaning in life? What do I have for ultimate fulfillment, satisfaction? Lost and without hope. And so, yeah, I join you in that, of course. Another avenue we could go down, and you kind of touched on this, but just to say, hey, look, that there, even I just think of the Proverbs. There's a bunch of Proverbs that talk about training children that have to do with discipline. And this is what you said earlier, like that they are helpful, practical pieces of proverbial wisdom, all these wise principles of how to navigate through life that are going to be beneficial. You and I have podcasted previously about some of these cultural topics, like where the progressives in our culture, the left-leaning people, are just go pedal to the metal in the area of abandoning all structure, abandoning all traditional values, abandoning all traditional morals. And we've said, hey, that's going to wreak havoc. That's going to be devastating. The alternative to that, someone who would follow and adhere to those traditional moral values, is going to fare better in life in the here and now, horizontally. It doesn't change anything vertically, eternally, but it does have a benefit here and now. So There's just this difference between, I talk to my girls, and I'll sort of wrap it up on this note, but I talk to my girls a lot about resting in the vertical, knowing that God is for us, providing. Christ did the work for us. He fulfilled the law. Through his Spirit, he gives us everything pertaining to life. It's all a gift of grace, and we live out of that stockpile, that infinite stockpile he's granted us through Jesus by his grace. So there's rest in the vertical. The whole New Testament is pointing throughout to rest. Jesus is our Sabbath rest. There's rest in the vertical. All that's taken care of. In the horizontal, there's work to be done. And if you want to become a better basketball player, then you got to work at it. Or if you want to get promoted at work or in the military or wherever else, there's work to be done. And Paul in the New Testament said, if a man's not willing to work, then he shouldn't eat. I mean, there's principles like that, like work is good. We were created for it. But that's different than, a vertical. And sometimes, and I don't know if you would agree with this, Rob, I think maybe perhaps when some of the supposedly biblical training and guiding and rearing goes wrong is if somehow those two categories are misunderstood or somehow confused, and there's this thought that we just have to sort of pound our kids into whether it's saying they believe in Jesus or saying they're going to obey God for God's sake. Like, we're just pounding people, whipping like Pharaoh to get people to get to work in the vertical as if there's anything they could ever do in the vertical. And that's not what do you think about that? Is that clear?
So many, well, there are so many people that have made professions of faith so that their parents would be happy and would kind of get off their back. I want my kids to tell me the truth. Like, I don't want them to not know and believe and embrace Jesus. Like, that's the worst, to me, that's the worst thing that I could endure. But I don't want them to tell me what I want to hear. I've told my kids that for the last 15 years, I'd say. Don't tell me what you think I want to hear.
You really
tell
think?
me what you're thinking. Tell me what you're feeling. Tell me what you're really believing. I want to know. Like, don't believe because I want you to believe. Like, I want to hear what you actually think. And I just think that's so radically different from some of the other stuff. I can't tell you how many people I have talked to over the years that they made a profession of faith when they were young, and they walk in a different direction later on in life. Sometimes the Lord opens their eyes after that, and they truly come to him. Sometimes they don't. But like part of that, I think, at least just from an opinion standpoint, is because there was a pressure to conform, not just to a behavioral standard, which there's a call for. Like in a household, there are rules that you've got to live by. If you told them to take out the trash, they got to do it. But there's this pressure to pray a prayer, to walk an aisle, to conform to the same biblical value exactly that you have. And again, that's what I want. I want to be a shepherd of my children. I want to bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. I want to speak the truth and love to them. And I want to see them be molded and fashioned in light of the gospel. So it's what I want. And the only one that can do that is the one that did it to and for me.
I've had conversations similarly with people in my office and counseling scenarios in which people have shared with me the grief and the frustration of their kids not believing or abandoning the church or walking away, or some I've several times I've met with parents whose child came out as homosexual, and that was devastating to them, and so I've talked about all these different types of things. And what I've tried to do with folks, I've tried to probe and ask questions And I'm not omniscient, only God knows, but I'm trying to like just let God's light be kind of revealed there and draw out. And what I've found at times is people having to admit, wow, part of the reason I wanted them to believe was for my own sense of security or what I wanted from them. And that's where that controlling thing comes in. It's like it would help us in some way, we think, if they would just convert or if they would just follow the rules or if they would just do this or that. And that's really about us. That's not really about what's good for them, nor is it really about God. We think it is, but it's kind of really about us sometimes, I think. So there's
Yeah.
that too. So your
Yeah,
thoughts?
you
Do you
hit
want
that
to
on the head.
you want to take
No,
the
no,
gamble of?
no, I think you hit that up. Yeah, that's good. Because
Yeah,
I'm resonating while you're talking there, because it's my heart's desire for my children to know Jesus the way that I do, to experience and receive Him in the way that I have, and it is a sense of security. Um, you know, I don't know how else to express that. Like I think it's such a it's such an important mission
yeah,
on my mind is that my children would know and embrace God and Jesus and receive life from Him. And to not have that would be really hard to grapple with. So yeah, I think that would strike at the weakest part of me if the Lord were not to do that. But
yeah,
that's from a human standpoint. Then
right.
that's where I come back to, if I can trust the Lord with my soul, I can trust the Lord with my kids' souls.
Yep,
And I'm not gonna be in competition with Him.
yep,
I'm not going to be in competition with Him. I'm just going to let Him do what only He can do, and point them to Him, and hopefully demonstrate the kind of love that I've received. I want to demonstrate that love toward
yeah,
my children and toward other people in front of my children. Like,
yep,
even as we have this conversation, think about the shiny happy people, and I can get a real disgust for the indoctrination and the wickedness that was intertwined, and I could get really disgusted with the producers who are angling against
yep,
anything that anything that speaks toward Jesus. I can get angry about that, and I don't want my kids seeing me get angry about every single thing. I want them to see me trust God even in the face of these kinds of things, so that I'm not I don't know. I think that's part of expressing my faith in God
yep.
is to not allow every wind and wave of our society to make me angry and bitter and resentful and hateful. It's an easy thing
Yeah, and I think that
to
that too
be hateful.
that too in some way stems from our own insecurities. If we feel like we got to fight back tenaciously, it's like we feel like we could lose some ground or we got something to lose, like we got skin in the game that we could lose. Like, look, if the gospel's true, we can't lose. So relax.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think the irony is that's a compelling invitation to other people, including our kids, when by a miracle of God's grace, we can demonstrate some of that security, that we're not rattled to the core by this stuff. Ironically, that's like, I think, potentially more compelling to others versus the pushy,
Yeah.
aggressive, I gotta fight. You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely.
So it's interesting. Uh, oh man, we could talk forever, Rob, but I feel like we're
Yeah.
just playing roulette here with this thing. Anytime now, it's
Yeah,
gonna.
and I think this topic. So now we can move on from shiny happy people, right? Um, I, I would suppose, but I think we can come back to this
Yeah,
parenting topic.
yeah.
Like, there are lots of ways to talk about it, and it's really practical, and it's an enjoyable conversation for the most part. Um, so
Other
I
than
think
technology, it has been.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So we
yeah,
can come back to kind of
yeah.
get into some of those weeds on a different occasion. But I think if we were to summarize what's really important for you and for me to communicate out is, as we parent and shepherd and tend and nurture and lead our children. There is a molding that we want to happen. We want to mold them, have them marked by the gospel and the knowledge of God and the experience in the life of God that He gives to them. We want them to be molded. It's not brainwashing, browbeating, breaking them down to build them up. That's the military that does that. We want God to transform them, and the only way that that's going to happen is as the Spirit gives them life that comes from Jesus, the author of life. It comes
Yep.
from His Father, who is the origin and author of life. It's so great. Like we enjoy talking about it. It brings joy to our souls. We've tasted and seen that the Lord is good, and we want our children to taste and see that the Lord is good. So all the other stuff, it fades into the background. So we want to instill these truths, but we do so at the trusting a faithful God.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. That makes all the difference, that approach versus maybe an exaggerated view of our own control or an exaggerated view of our own importance in the process. Like we're very important, vitally important, but we're also expendable, because God ultimately is their hope, and it's a great privilege to be able to point them to Him. And you and I know both enjoy that part of our relationship with our kids, and enjoy the dynamic of that. And we know that it is ultimately up to Him. So grateful for that. So why don't we end on that note, Rob? But I agree. Let's kind of come up with some other avenues we can go down under this heading of parenting that would be probably helpful for our audience, and hopefully we can just touch on some kind of raw realities that people can relate to, and then speak some truth in ways that are helpful and healing, and even maybe give guidance in areas. So yeah, that'd be great, man. Do you mind if I close this in prayer here?
Please do.
All right, let's pray. Thank you, Father, for the time today. Thank you for the ability to do this. And we've had a couple glitches along the way today, but we're just amazed that we can even pull this off at all when Rob is so far away from here. And yet we're able to talk face to face and record these conversations and share them with our audience. Thank you for that. And we look to you for the future of different topics we should address. And most of all, we look forward to what you'll do in showing us, opening our eyes to see more and more clearly how great you are and what you've done for us through Christ. In His name we pray. Amen.